welcome to the Psychiatry and Psychotherapy podcast. I'm here to talk about getting rid of burnout, increasing job satisfaction, and feeling like an expert in what you do. One thing that created a lot of burnout and angst for me was trying to get continued medical education right at the last minute. So why not join the CME membership and do CME while listening to this podcast? Go to psychiatrypodcast.com, sign up, sign in, take the test, and the certification is emailed to you in seconds. All right, welcome back to the podcast. I am joined today with some residents, some PGY2s and one PGY3. Dr. Sonia de la Cruz, Dr. Sarah Alam, Dr. Manoshna Cantada, and Derek Lanuto. All right, and we are going to be discussing a paper called The Association of Cardiorespiratory Fitness with Long-Term Mortality Among Adults Undergoing Exercise Treadmill Testing. This was a 2018 cardiology study, which is a little bit of a different genre for this podcast, but I think it is very important to discuss. So maybe we'll start with Sonia de la Cruz. Yeah. Sure. Do you want to just kind of like open up some of the basics of the study?
Yeah. So basically, this study was a retrospective cohort study. It took data from January 1991 to December 2014, and they looked at adult patients and stratified them into different groups for age and sex, and they, grouped them into like low fitness, below average, above average, high, and elite. And they basically looked at how cardiorespiratory fitness correlated or, was associated with all-cause mortality.
Yeah. So basically there was 5 groups. And how did they measure fitness at the beginning of this retrospective cohort study? Derek.
So they took patients that have been undergoing exercise treadmill testing, stress testing.
Right. So basically they stick them on a treadmill test and see how long they can last. They increase the incline, increase the speed, right? Mm-hmm. How many minutes they can last. And does anyone remember what age, the average age of the group when they started? I think that's important to talk about, to mention.
53?
Was the mean?
Mean was 53, yeah. So middle-aged adults, right? Followed them for, on average, 8.4 years. Okay. So, Sarah, let's talk about just some of the basic, like before they're trying to control any of the variables, just the hard data of what percentage of this large group, like we're talking about 122,000 people were in this study, right? So what percentage of the people died in the lowest performance group, the bottom 25%?
Yeah, in the lowest performance group, 6,904 people, or 23% of people died in the lowest performance group.
Okay. And what about the below average?
In the below average group, it was 10.6%.
Okay. And in the above average?
It was 7.3%.
And in the high?
4.7%.
In the elite?
2.6%.
Okay. Does that let's just discuss that real quick. Like, have you ever seen data where the all-cause mortality was that big of a difference?
No.
Not at all.
That's mind-boggling.
Like, okay, so this is the difference between the low performance group to that elite was like 1,000% difference. So to get from 2.6% all the way to 23%, that's a 1,000% change in all-cause mortality.
That's insane.
That's amazing.
Like, so think about like statins. I looked up the best statin research I could find, and like the all-cause mortality decrease for primary prevention, statins like Lipitor or those kind of things, was like 0.6%.
Wow.
So this is reducing death a lot more than 0.6%, right? Now you can't compare them side to side, right? But it's just like one big study versus another big study. Like, this is a good way to think about like magnitude of effect, right? Like, how much of a magnitude of effect does something make a difference? Yeah, it's shocking. It's shocking. So, if you think about like all of the physiological things that are going on with fitness, metabolic health. Actually, maybe we should integrate the second paper a little bit with this, because I can ask you guys to kind of break down what are some of the things that are going on that make a difference. Yeah. So anyone have anything off the top of their head from the second paper? Can someone introduce the name of the paper? And
Sure. So the second paper that we looked at is called The Pathophysiological Mechanisms, explaining the association between low skeletal muscle mass and cognitive function.
okay. So basically, people, like, what happens when they don't have strength to their cognitive function, and like, what are the mechanisms that are going on between those things? Okay. Go ahead.
So, yeah, the paper goes on to talk about cognitive impairment associated with low skeletal muscle mass. And then it goes on to talk about different things such as systemic inflammation, insulin metabolism, protein metabolism, mitochondrial function, and all these things that ultimately can decrease cognitive functioning.
Right. So it's like if there's one thing that I've heard in studies, and the more studies I read that makes the biggest impact, that can slow the rate of cognitive decline, it's like being physically fit, strength training, cardiovascular fitness. And so you just listed off a bunch of different things that are manipulated by being fit, right? So what did you guys think of this idea in the paper that like muscles are actually like an endocrine tissue? Was that kind of something that came through? Am I making that up? Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's definitely
A
on.
neuroendocrine tissue? Is that? Yeah.
I think I agree with that because as we know that most popular exercise studies kind of focus on adipose tissue and how it increases inflammation, and how if you were to decrease adipose tissue or the amount of fat molecules, you would actually decrease inflammation, which the study kind of targets. It basically says that when you have an increase in inflammation, you're also secreting like these cytokines that can cross the blood-brain barrier, which can lead to neurodegeneration and kind of exacerbate cognitive impairment. Versus when you're exercising more, you're kind of decreasing the inflammatory markers and kind of preventing that inflammation from entering the brain.
Very good. Yeah. Yeah. What are you thinking?
So one of the parts that I really was struck by was that not only are we decreasing inflammation, but that the muscles actually lead to increase in certain transport or transmitters that they dub myokines, that they even link to when certain myokines are increased in the central nervous system, it can lead to BDNF increases, which can increase neurogenesis and synaptic plasticity.
Right. So you have BDNF, which if you look at a lot of different psychiatric medications, why they work, BDNF is like one of those things that we're seeing common, like with SSRIs, ketamine, and exercise, right? So, and there's other drugs as well, but to focus on and specifically exercise with how it increases the neuroplasticity, the brain that can change, which is why I try so hard with my patients who are in like the IOP partial program to exercise while they're in the IOP partial so that they can get that full neuroplastic effect from the therapy. And, okay, so what about the insulin? Does anyone remember the insulin and how that relates to things?
Yeah, so basically as you age, you actually develop insulin resistance because the number of insulin receptors you have decreases. And when you're in a state of hyperinsulinemia and you have less receptors, then basically the number of like pathological markers in your brain increases. Some of these being the tau phosphorylation, as well as just cerebrovascular damage at the microvessels, as well as an increase in the alpha beta plaques that we see, which is why we don't want to be in a chronic state of hyperinsulinemia.
Yeah. Right. And we know from data that people with, type 2 diabetes have like a higher risk of, depression, anxiety, different mental health issues, right? So we know that. And this is just like another layer of that. We know that increased risk of cognitive decline, dementia. And so, why not attack it at the root of the issue, which is sarcopenia? Sarcopenia being low muscle mass, right? Anything else jump out on the study like that you're just kind of like it's on the...
Yeah, I think it was really interesting to point out at the very beginning of the study, they mentioned how sarcopenia was noted to be it was found 3 times higher in patients with dementia than those without dementia. And I just thought that was an interesting find to see how low skeletal mass actually correlates to decrease in cognitive functioning.
Right. And to be fair, it's often patients who develop dementia do not want to exercise as much, do not want to move as much. They're going to be less mindful to engage in physical activities that they enjoyed in the past.
Mm-hmm. What struck out to me was kind of the concept of contracting skeletal muscle behaving like an endocrine organ.
Yeah.
Because I think that's not something that I have thought about personally before. And then the concept of the myokines, like the cytokines and the peptides that they release. And in the study, they talked about how peripheral concentrations of BDNF are increased because of muscular contraction directly. So you have increased BDNF, mRNA, and protein expression in muscle tissue. And that kind of boggles my mind. And then we have like a competing kind of force with pro-inflammatory cytokines that reduces like central BDNF expression. So kind of, how can we take ownership, of health and kind of influence factors physiologically is by exercise. Because we can imagine like our muscle contraction, releasing those myokines, leading to increased BDNF, leading to neurogenesis and increased cognitive function ability.
Excellent. Yeah. So it's a neuroendocrine. It's a neuroendocrine promoting tissue, muscle. And so when I'm working with the elderly, I'm often thinking, how do I get them exercising? I have one patient in particular who's older, who's fairly bedbound, and I've gotten her to start deadlifting.
That's
and
awesome.
I have a friend in LA, and he's a physical trainer, and he will go to her house a couple times a week, and it's made a huge difference.
Yeah.
It really has, and it's such a pivotal and important part in the brain's functionality.
Mm-hmm.
So
I think that what you did is incredible too, because a lot of times we hear about like aerobic exercise, and that's usually like the go-to kind of like to do cardio and stuff, and that deadlifting and like getting your muscle and getting patients to do that too and incorporate that into their lives is it's a very cool next step too.
yeah, I like deadlifting and I like squatting because you can, and with a barbell because you can progress it, and it also helps with balance. She's had issues with balance, and so if you can add like 1 pound, for an old person, you can add like 1 pound to the bar every time you do it, and so you can start really light, like broomstick light, right? And you can even reduce the range of motion when you start with someone who can't do the full range of motion. And then you can slowly progress it. And it's just like, 3 sets of 5, and you can add 1 pound each time you do it. There was a time where I couldn't do chin-ups. And I got like a bunch of bands from Amazon. And I figured out how to kind of increase the weight about 1 pound or 2 pounds each time I did it. So I do like 3 sets of 5 every other day for about 6 months. And I was able to get up to doing chin-ups with like 20 pounds dangling from me by the end of it, 3 sets of 5. And so it's just like very, 2 times a week is sufficient. And it's just slow progression, adding just a very slight amount of weight. And if you're working with a small muscle group, like the arms, like less weight, right? If you're working with a big muscle group and you're a normal human being who's like in their 20s or 30s, you could probably add 5 pounds, like deadlift or squat. So yeah, it's just very, very thoughtful way to progressively do it. And you should definitely watch some videos on technique and maybe get some coaching by a good coach. And if anyone wants to connect with one, just reach out to me. I hope I don't get too many emails.
And it's a great way to also do behavioral activation. I think when you encourage your patients to do one little thing, whatever it is that they're passionate about, and they do more and more of it, it gives them a sense of mastery and empowerment, and it kind of starts this cascade, hopefully, of them living out the values that they have in their life.
It's goal setting. Like they're setting little goals at each time you're hitting. That's encouraging.
And they can see the progress.
I think that actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because it's not just a pure mechanistic change that's happening when you progressively exercise. It's like, I did this for myself. I pushed myself. I stepped out of my comfort zone. And that sort of behavioral, right, activation. If you look at a lot of CBT studies, they have exercise as part of the behavioral.
Yeah.
So they have cognitive behavioral therapy. The behaviors are often doing something physical, getting out in nature, going for hikes, going for walks. I have a lot of people who like reach out and they're like, what is the perfect routine? And I'll often start with like, well, what do you enjoy, right? Because if you love cycling and that's your thing, I'm not going to tell you to not cycle as like the majority of your exercise, right? Or if you love running, I'm going to say, yeah, maybe 1 or 2 days a week, strength training, but the majority of your exercise could be running, right? So I'm not like overly rigid with the type of exercise. And you can see in the first study we looked at, it was treadmill test. So this wasn't just pure strength training. But a treadmill test does look at strength because of the incline increasing and because of the intensity increasing. But it's looking at the overall like mitochondria functioning, like how much essentially like as the watts that you're forced to produce increases, like how long are you able to go? So how effective are you at moving in such a way against a load, which is both combination strength and cardio, essentially. Okay, so let's, I want to jump back into the first study real quick and talk about the other comorbidities that they found in the hazard ratio. Okay, so this is figure 2C. Do you guys see that? Okay, so they broke things into hazard ratios. So remember I said that before you adjusted for any comorbidities, the hazard ratio or the change between the low to the high group was 1,000, right? Now that's a hazard ratio of essentially like 10. Okay. If you control for the variables, what did the hazard ratio become? And what did they control for?
So it came to about 5 from low to elite.
Yeah.
They controlled for comorbidities such as smoking, coronary artery disease, diabetes, hypertension, end-stage renal disease.
So even after controlling for all of those things, right, which we know exercise in and of itself will decrease your risk of coronary artery disease, diabetes, hypertension, end-stage renal disease. But even after controlling for all of those variables, it still was 5, which means like 500% difference, right? Okay, how big was the hazard ratio on smoking?
1.4, much less.
How about coronary artery disease?
1.29.
Diabetes?
1.4.
Hypertension?
1.21.
End-stage renal disease?
2.78. Okay,
so think about the magnitude of those compared to exercise. Did that surprise you?
It did.
It did. But you know what surprised me is like, think about all the effort as doctors in medical school that we focus so much on not smoking, reducing the risk of coronary artery disease, treating people once they already have coronary artery disease, right? Treating people when they have diabetes, right? And the hazard ratio on those for all-cause mortality is significantly lower than exercise, which makes me wonder, like, why don't we have gyms attached to almost every primary care office across the US? You know, like, why don't insurance companies just provide free gym membership, but not just gym membership, like free personal training, right? You think about, like, okay, if you have group-based personal training, like I go to strength training in the morning, there's like 6 of us or so that are like squatting, deadlifting all together. There's one coach, right? Think about the impact of that compared to other types of treatments, which are super expensive. And I think one of the problems is that insurance companies are often not thinking 10 or 20 years ahead of time. And so I think this is really going to take more of a national approach to medicine and reducing risk of death, population health, right? It's like an intensive, it's like we spend so much money on the last 2 years of life. Whereas like if they took that money and invested it a lot into like the 50 years of life that precede that, I think we would have a much bigger bang for the buck, longevity.
Especially with this paper, which talks about how the muscle mass is associated with dementia in older adults. We know dementia, like caring for that in memory care units is extremely expensive as well. So even if this paper is somehow, if this shows that exercising can be associated with dementia, I know in the paper it also discusses how there's 55 million people with dementia, and as we age, it's predicted the number will double every 5 years. So it can also, so this can show too that how exercise can help be preventative towards a very prevalent and very expensive psychiatric condition that we have.
Yep. It's going to be a bigger issue as well in a lot of highly developed countries who currently, if you look at the baby diaper to adult diaper ratio, have you guys heard of that?
Yeah.
No, I
Have not.
No?
No.
It's a good way of telling if a population is going to decline. So in like when countries enter into that sort of high development stage, they have less babies. And so it goes down from like trying to have like 6 babies to like 1.6, right? So then the population starts to decline, but there's some nations that have a large growing body of old people and not as much children. And so you imagine like when that group hits, the dementia needs are just going to be huge, huge, right?
I think it's also like noteworthy to mention that they said that, a greater increase in exercise can also cause like this inverse relationship in all-cause mortality, but also the impact that it has on your mental health. Like just because you're exercising, your physical health does improve, but also your mental health, how you feel about yourself, how you view yourself definitely also takes a toll for the better.
Right. I mean, this is like, I've covered this before, but just to reiterate, I mean, there was a study. One of my favorite studies was they looked at sertraline versus 3 times a week cardio with groups, and they found that they were equivalently effective. Other studies have looked at hand grip strength and how there's like the stronger the hand grip, the less likely they are to have future episodes of anxiety and depression. There's a huge effect size for strength training, a huge effect size for cardio, and it seems to be like those are separate drugs that you can give someone. So if you add them both together, it has a huge impact on depression, anxiety, mood disorders. So there's so many studies, and I'm going to do a future episode on like just a yearly update. I want to get done on like exercise and the new studies coming out because they're just always coming out, and it just further proves the point, And so how effective are you guys at getting your patients to exercise?
It's hard.
I think it can definitely be challenging, but I think what I tell my patients is it's like take it one day at a time. It's not going to be like you're going to be the rock,
Right.
overnight. So I think just take it one day at a time. Personally, when I exercise, I try to gradually increase because I do cramp easy and I do get sore. So I remind myself to stretch. And me and Derek actually started playing badminton on the weekends. So I think if you can find a friend to go exercise, it makes it a lot easier.
That's awesome. Yeah. If you, I think, if you can combine it with something that's fun, like team oriented, like that's like a total plus as well.
In sports, I playing anything in sports related or game related, you almost forget you're exercising.
Right.
Yeah. For me, I love dancing. So not only is it like a form of self-expression, but I get good exercise out of it. And then recently, I actually started taking salsa classes. So then that's also like a social component where you get to meet people, you have friends, you go to social events together. So it's an extra reinforcer to kind of go. So for me, that I've found that to be my thing for exercise. And, with patients, I like to kind of explore what, where do they get their joy from? Because I think it really has to come out of them, like for them to express, what are they passionate about? What are their hopes and dreams? Like, how do they envision a life of vitality for them? And kind of tapping into that and taking baby steps, kind of setting a few goals, like, some activity scheduling throughout the week.
Yeah, that's good. Meaning, you're talking about, like enjoying connecting with new people, learning new skills, but also like moving your body, in the dance. And it's when I was a medical student resident, we used to go salsa dance all the time.
Oh, that's awesome.
Don't ask me to break down my moves after. I was just there to give people a sense of humor, Yeah. Do you have any exercise goals?
Yeah. I go to the gym like 3-4 times a week, and then the other days I walk as a stress relief. I think that with patients too, it's like how we've all talked about, like what, meet them where they want to be. But I also think for, because when I went to your last talk where we talked about this a little bit, I tried incorporating with some patients, and I found that the patients who may be a little resistant to medications or want to try the more like organic route, this was a great in between, because it still felt like we always wanted to try to do something. And then the patient also feels like you're listening to them, like maybe they're hesitant to medications, and this is like the first step of them trying to meet a goal in psychiatry. So yeah, I really found in that population as well that this is useful, and then it's a great adjunct to medications too.
I feel like when we learn in med school, a lot of times, a lot of treatments, whether it's for hypertension, diabetes, the textbooks and what we learn and the PowerPoints all kind of will say like a little at the very top, the very beginning, they'll say like, oh, lifestyle modification. And then they go on to the actual treatments we need to learn.
Right,
and it's just kind of blown over. But, I think, with these studies, we're learning that it's not something to blow over. Like it's, the magnitude's huge.
And I want my listeners to like, not just think like, oh, okay, I'm going to start to talk to my patients about it. No, I want you to think like, what are you going to do? How are you going to sort of find joy in moving and exercise and strength training, and really see it as like a journey, like, it's a lifelong value, right? Of getting fit, staying fit. You're going to be sick less often. You're going to have better cognitive function as you age. You're going to live longer, see your grandkids, great grandkids, be less depressed, less anxious, have less stress. I think about the way that we catabolize stress is impacted by not just like, are you exercising in the here and now, right? But have you been exercising strength training for a decade before that really stressful thing happens? So, because essentially when I looked at, and I've done some lectures for medical students on like stress, a very simple way to think about it is we only have one way that stress gets triggered and gets impacted and floods us with like catecholamines and, aldosterone, and, we retain salt, and it's like you may get puffy even a little bit when you're super stressed, or, like all of this stress system is triggered both by physical and psychological. So if we train the physical over time to progressively handle stress better, then it's like it also trains the psychological. Okay, so there's like an overlap in how we handle stress.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that point. I think when you're training your body, you're definitely training your brain. Also, when you said earlier how you gradually increase when you're exercising and setting those challenges for yourself, I think you're also conditioning your brain like, I could do more. I want to see myself do more.
Yep. Right. Yeah. So it's like, it's hard, but then maybe there's value in doing something hard.
I was just thinking when we talked about the different variables that we talked about, different comorbidities like smoking, diabetes, hypertension, not all of them. Like we know there's a genetic predisposition to some of them, but for some of them, like smoking, with obesity, hypertension, depending on, a lot of this can be like if you're doing something in habit. Basically, like I feel like all these, like kind of we talked about like how they talked about with badminton, like group helps a lot. Like a lot of these, like it becomes a habit. Like smoking becomes a habit. Eating, like if the way you eat is a habit as well. Like your diet is a habit. Smoking is a habit. And same thing with exercise, is that this is a habit. It's something that takes a while to get used to in this routine. Like with all of us, when we stop working out, it's hard to get back in that routine. So I think that's also important to know too, that there's, just like with our mood, it's going to fluctuate when we're able to keep these habits. But hopefully over time, it just becomes part of our lifestyle and not, something that we get accustomed to. So I think a big thing that I learned from this too is a lot of these variables are habitual, and we just, have to be aware of that and kind of set that goal that even on the hard days that we need to make this a habit, so that in the long run, like you said, 10, 20 years down the road is when we'll really start to see those long-term effects.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really important, is like, what are the small habits? Like when I talk to someone about starting to exercise, let's say they haven't been going for a while to the gym, like the first thing that they want to do is get back to where they were when they like left off a couple years ago. And if you're a resident and the last time you worked out probably was like pre-medical school, you're just not going to do what you used to do. Like, let's be honest. Like, I'm not training like I was when I was in college. Like, it's just impossible. I used to do like an hour on the rowing machine. Now I do 20 minutes to half an hour if I'm like really pushing myself. It's like, so when you start up again, maybe you do 15 minutes. So I tell a lot of people, hey, when you hit the gym, you have 15 minutes. Get as much as you can done and leave. And just do 15 minutes, Or like if you're a medical student and you're super busy, just when you wake up in the morning, put your shoes on and set your timer for like 10 minutes and just see how far you can get away from your house in 10 minutes and then run back. Simple is better. Repetitive is better. Can you get a group of people to work out in your garage? Can you get a group of people to go to some workout class and do it together and have it be repetitive, right?
Yeah. And I think it's also important to have grace for yourself and patience, because I resonate with what you just said. Like, I used to do martial arts, and I tried doing it again recently, and I just realized how my physical ability has declined over time, and it's really frustrating because you remember what you could do, and being usually medicine attracts type A people, and you're very goal driven and you want to get results quick, that it kind of makes that blow even harder. So then you kind of have to backtrack and realize it's okay, like
Yep.
it's a process.
Yep.
There's grace for you, and start from the beginning and gradually go up again, and there's no rush to things.
Yeah, I'm always like, it's like I get very motivated and then I try to like lose weight while I'm starting to work out again, which like those don't go well together. It's actually better to stay the same weight or maybe even gain a little bit of weight while you start to strength train. Yeah. So it's like we get in these cycles of super motivated, let's do something. And then it's like, yeah, try to lose weight while you're lifting. It's like, good luck. It's like so miserable. It's the hardest thing ever, right? So think about things like that in like phases. Like, okay, I'm going to like stay the same weight, but get a little bit more in shape. It's like people can also get obsessed with like how much they weigh and their like aesthetics and what they look like. And it's like, no, like I'm telling you from this data, this is doing it for your brain, you know? And that's the way I like to think about it. It's like, I'm working out for my brain. Like,
That's awesome.
yeah. So
Should be a new motto or slogan. I'm working out for my brain.
yeah, you're doing salsa for your brain.
Yes,
There you go.
neurogenesis, BDNF.
Okay, yeah. Is there anything the big from these articles that we did not discuss that you wanted to make sure that you put out there as like a takeaway that you had?
I think my biggest thing, kind of more big picture, macro, of the one article, just talking about how like muscles can be like endocrine organs and everything, was just how interconnected everything can be. We're so trained to thinking like mind and body, or brain and body are separate. There's a blood-brain barrier, nothing crosses, and like even all the mechanisms they show all tend to be, they admit that they're all interconnected and just one thing can affect another. So to me was just kind of any one part of our lives that we improve kind of improve everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When it talked about with decrease in skeletal muscle mass and cognitive function, how we've been discussing, and the different like IL-6 and cytokines, I think that's just a really exciting time for dementia awareness, and especially because of all these new medications coming out for preventative medication. So this article got me thinking that maybe in the future they'll have like different types of cytokines or different inflammatory markers that'll be related to this that in the future can potentially like help with preventative medications. And also like this paper shows that one of the ways to help prevent dementia can potentially be exercise. So I think that's also if you're more prone to it or you have family history, that it's also a great motivator to start working out more. And
Yeah, I doubt that there will be one drug that prevents Alzheimer's that they figure out. Because, I mean, just look at this. Like, there's so many different things going on with strength. And if you look at the all-cause mortality data, it's like there's such a big impact on metabolic function and longevity. So I don't think that there's ever going to be a medicine that beats exercise. There's never going to be a pill that you can take that beats exercise. And a well thought up, progressive, habit, right? I just don't think there is going to be. So hopefully this ages well. Any
that was good.
Dr. Cantata, any takeaways?
I was going to agree with Dr. Allen with her advice on exercising, improving cognition. I actually just finished my geriatric psychiatry rotation, and that was what he recommended as well. He said if there was one thing that can help with, progressing with dementia, it's that exercise can actually prevent cognitive impairment, at least slow it down.
Yeah. Yeah. Dr. De La Cruz, did you have any other takeaways? No?
No, not really. I think the most impressive thing that I've seen from these studies is, that difference in the hazard ratio and just how much exercise really can do for us personally and for our patients. And how, I think it would be really beneficial to think long-term that, an ounce of prevention is worth more than a pound of cure. And whatever little impact that we can make in our daily lives and talking to our patients, it's cumulative, it's additive. And if we all do it, we can really make a difference. And I think, that's a really empowering thing to do. And that's why we entered medicine. So it's great to use knowledge, to have knowledge like this and to be able to apply it to our daily lives.
Okay. So in summary, Like, let's say every single one of my listeners, every one of my 40,000 people that probably listen to this in the next year, take this seriously. And they, over their course of their life, they each convince 1,000 people who are below average fitness, right? Providers will see many thousands of people over their life. Let's say they convince 1,000 that were below average to get to above average physical fitness. Now, we know that the low performing group, 23% died, and the above average, 7.3% died. So that's a 16% difference. Okay, so the amount of lives that would be saved, prolonged, would be 6.5 million.
Yeah. It's amazing.
It's pretty cool.
Nice.
Wow.
Pretty cool. So that's my hope. So take this seriously. Print out these articles for yourself. Read them yourself. Digest them. Reread them. Let them encourage you to talk to people about getting fit and staying fit, and the important neuroendocrine tissue that we have, which is muscle. All right, we'll leave it there.